Okay, so hello everyone, and welcome to today's panel discussion about the topic LGBTQ people in STEM. So science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. Today we have a diverse expert panel of 4 queer academics working in different STEM fields with diverse backgrounds from different countries. Our discussion will focus on common questions and problems faced by queer people in academia. And generally giving tips on helping students that want to get into STEM fields. And we want to give you insights into what it means to be a queer student in STEM, and also give you helpful tips on how to help with your future career. So I want to start by introducing the panelists. So I would go myself first. So my name is Sylvie Bonny. I'm born in Germany. I've always been interested in science basically since I was a little kid. I've always been obsessed with making little experiments and playing around with stuff. So it's always been very clear to me that I want to do a career in science. So especially after high school, though, I realized I really like the topic of biotechnology. So I wanted to work in that field. And so after I finished my high school degree, I moved to Maastricht in the Netherlands and studied natural sciences, which I really enjoyed. And also, I wasn't out before coming to there, but moving so far away to a place where no one knows me and I'm around all new people, I felt a lot more comfortable reinventing myself and being more myself. And yeah, coming out since then has been very helpful for me, especially for my self-confidence. And yeah, I've never went back into the closet afterwards. And yeah, I really enjoyed my time there, especially all the science projects I did there. So afterwards, it was kind of clear to me that I want to have a career in academia. So after my bachelor's degree, I started a master's degree at Vrije Universiteit Amsterdam in Biomolecular Sciences, which is what I'm studying now and what this panel discussion has been organized for. What I love about Amsterdam is that there's a large queer community. So I personally love to be able to stay in touch with people that can truly understand my problems themselves. So I really like to have a larger community to talk to. And yeah, similarly, even when I did like a research internship in Japan, first thing I did at the local university was go to the LGBTQ association and talk to those students and hang with them. And yeah, we had a jolly good time. So yeah, for me personally, being queer is a lot about community and hanging with other people from your community. Yeah, so that's me. One important disclaimer at this point is that neither my opinions nor the speakers represent Vrije Universiteit Amsterdam. Yeah, with that out of the way, I would like to ask our panelists to introduce themselves. So talk a bit about your background, your interest in STEM and science, how you found your identity and what being queer means to you. So does anyone like to start, or Jessica, would you like to start?
Sure, I'll go first.
Thank you.
So I'm Jess Anand. I'm currently at the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor, so that's in Southeast Michigan. I grew up in the Boston area in Massachusetts. And I also really like science from a relatively early age. For better or worse, my dad is also an academic. So, he's a mechanical engineer. He doesn't do the same kind of science that I do. But I've always been interested in figuring out how things work. And I had a pretty influential chemistry teacher in high school. So that's how I ended up in sort of an indirect way, how I ended up where I am now. So I'm currently in the Department of Pharmacology. My degree is in medicinal chemistry. So I work mostly on drug design and drug development. I started more on the chemistry end of things and moved slowly towards biology as I continued my schooling. If we decide we want to talk about science, I work on opioids and overdose therapeutics, substance abuse, and relapse. I am probably older than a lot of the attendees here, so I'm almost 40, and things have changed a lot since I came out in middle school. It definitely felt like a thing that was risky or dangerous, even in the suburbs of Boston in like, the late 90s. There was one teacher who was out at my school. And then there were a couple of teachers who were only a little bit out, like, they were maybe dating someone but didn't want to talk about it at work because they thought it would impact their ability to do their job at high school or to work with. I remember I had one teacher who was really important to me, but she wouldn't be out at work because she also worked with underrepresented minorities, specifically like Latino, Hispanic kids, and she was pretty sure that their parents wouldn't want her to help them get a higher education if they knew that she was queer. So she was closeted because she didn't think she'd be able to do the supportive work for um, another part of her community. So I remember that feeling very tenuous. My school didn't have a GSA, a Gay Straight Alliance. We didn't have more letters yet in the late 90s. So we just had a GSA, which, occasionally people would be like, oh, you're part of the GSA, and but like it wasn't ever anything physically dangerous. It was just the sort of thing that you might get made fun of for. I was in the Boston area, so it was on average a little more liberal, on average a little more accepting than other places in the US. For my undergrad, I went to Barnard College, which is a women's college. And again, going to a new place, knowing a bunch of new people, going to a women's college in New York City, I was able to find a much larger queer community, which was really nice. And it wasn't that big a deal, right? And then I moved to grad school, and it was exhausting to come out over and over again, especially because I'm often straight passing. My partner mostly uses he, him pronouns, but not entirely. And so people just sort of assume that you're straight. And so it was kind of exhausting to try to keep telling people, no, I'm not really interested in any one kind of person. I'm interested in lots of kinds of people, especially because it didn't always feel relevant in a work setting. But it does come up kind of sideways sometimes, right? People will make an assumption about you, and you have to be like, actually, no, that assumption you're making is wrong. Sometimes those have intersecting assumptions, right? I'm faculty, and I got mistaken for a student at an event I organized last week twice. One of the people was an invited speaker who had asked for faculty meetings, and I organized it, and he assumed I was a student. So, sometimes you get intersecting assumptions about who you are and what role you play. But I would say that things are really pretty good right now, at least in my immediate vicinity. My lab is surprisingly clear and out about it. I'd say at least half the people in my lab are somewhere on, the rainbow flag. And I don't think that it gets in the way of them doing good science, at least at my institution. I also know that people sometimes have reservations, like if they're on the job market, about whether or not they want to be out professionally, because in some parts of the country they can still be out. Did I hit all the parts that you wanted me to, Silvio? I don't remember exactly what I was supposed to be doing other than saying a little bit about who I am and my science and what I can.
I think that was already very much
Great.
everything almost. Yeah, thank you for the story. It was very nice. Very nice background. Yeah, Chris, do you want to continue yourself?
Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Chris. I am a former teacher of Silvio. That's how we met. So my job is as a lecturer of physics in also in the Netherlands, in Maastricht, right at the other end of the country, sandwiched between Germany and Belgium. There's this little spit of land, and Maastricht sits there. And it's a pretty small city, very much centered around the university. And in that program, we have, or in that university, we have a program called the Maastricht Science Program, which is a liberal arts and science program based in the STEM subjects. And in Europe, that's kind of a rare thing. Most students come into a university here with a degree of a specific title, and they start on day one and they finish in year three. And they basically maybe make one or two choices along the way. And we love this liberal arts and science model that's going over in America. So we brought that back and said, let's have a bit of freedom, some choice, and let the students build an academic path for themselves, depending on what they're interested in, because apparently when you're 17 and a half, you don't have everything figured out yet, and you might want to make different choices. So that's what our program is sort of built around. And we have a very small scale program and very close relationship between the staff and the students. So that makes a very nice community. It means that we kind of know a little bit more about each other than maybe other people or other students would expect from their teachers. And yeah, you get to learn a little bit about who's on the rainbow flag, as Jess eloquently put it. I think that's a really nice description. And we're very diverse in terms of internationalization, but we're also very diverse in terms of student backgrounds, and that makes a really nice place to work. And it also means that, you know, I can see in my work kind of having making a difference. Oh, I see that wearing a pronoun badge makes a difference. Wearing a rainbow colored lanyard makes a difference to people. Just little nods here and there helps. We talked a bit about science. Jess told us about drug development. I'm a physicist. I work at the Large Hadron Collider as well in my research time, which is this 26-kilometer diameter tunnel, 100 meters underground in Geneva. And we crash particles together and then measure what comes out. That's what I do besides teaching. And my third hat is as the coordinator of academic advising. So that makes sure that students are happy, healthy, having a good time, sort of the pastoral leader in our program. Also supporting the staff when they have challenging cases, when students need assistance and support as well. And yeah, I think it also helps when you have students who maybe are struggling with some of the issues that probably we'll talk about over the next hour or so. I think it really helps for students to see that they have allies and that they can be open and discuss these things, because many students in that early stages of life are going through discovering themselves, or maybe like others alluded to, they decide to be who they have always wanted to be or have been wanting to be for a long time when they come to university. But then they have to face up to the realities maybe of going back to another country which is not so welcoming to these issues, or to a family who has very long held opinions that are difficult to change, let's say. And you can almost see that conflict as the end of the year comes, and they get kind of the reality of having to go back home. And now either do they go back into the closet? Do they try to be themselves? Do they want to live this double life? And that can be tough as well. But I think you know, it's really great that we have not just LGBTQ community members in our staff, support staff, and teaching staff, but also, you know, allies as well. And I'm very happy to have great colleagues for that too. That's sort of my story. Do you want to know anything more, Silvio? I think that's good, right?
No, that's good. That's good. Thank you. Yeah. Thank you, Chris. TL, do you want to go next?
Yeah, I can go. TL Jordan, I currently am not actually working in STEM. I am an instructor at Winona State University in Minnesota in the United States, and I teach gender, women's, and sexuality studies. But I also hold a master's in immunology, which is where I spent a large portion of my life before kind of pivoting careers. I and I assume we'll get into this, but I ended up actually leaving STEM because of transphobia and a lot of other issues. And what brought me over to gender studies was actually feminist science, because while I was studying as a graduate student, I was increasingly frustrated by the lack of, well, like just like intentionality and diversity and intersectionality. But I was like, science is biased too, guys. And everyone would be like, no. And I'm like, but it is. Like, there's a way we can do this where we actually acknowledge. And so I found a home in feminist science, which then led me to trans studies, which as a trans person kind of felt like a natural shift. So I have this very interesting kind of hands in a couple of pots where like I'm studying trans studies, but I also like really still love STEM, and like that still is a home for me. And so I really enjoy teaching like the STEM students on my campus and like being like, look, like this matters for what you're doing, and like people will notice, right? Like, you know, I remember being in my PhD program and always like raising my hand and being like, hey, we're talking about humans and we're talking about testosterone and estrogen. What about trans people? And everyone would be like, yeah, what about them? And I'm like, come on, y'all. So that's my background, is I have a master's in gender studies and in immunology. I came out right after starting my immunology PhD program, and and it was tough. It was really hard to find a community. I was at Mayo Clinic, which I felt very alone. And so I very quickly not only sought other queer people where I could, which was actually across the globe rather than even at my institution, but also became like and we were kind of chatting about this earlier, like the resident expert on queerness, which I was like, I just came out a month ago and suddenly everyone's asking me how to do everything. Yeah, I think that's where I'm at. And oh, when I studied, I was in the mix of immunology, but I was also in protein biophysics. I was studying light chain amyloidosis, which is a protein misfolding disease. And I was really interested because it's a part of your antibodies that misfold. And so I was like, well, if it's a part of your antibodies, does your body recognize it? And so I was interested in seeing how the disease progressed in terms of your immune system, and utilizing stem cells to try to reverse some of the damage that is caused by amyloidosis and protein misfolding. So that's kind of my STEM background. Excited to be here.
I'm excited to have you here. Thank you. Andres, your turn.
Hi, everyone. I'm Andres Mejia. I'm currently a postdoctoral scholar at the Institute for Environmental Science and Technology at the Autonomous University of Barcelona. I'm originally from Mexico City, where I was born to a single mother there, but about half of my time I was raised in Massachusetts, but far from the urban part of Boston. I was out in the very rural Western Massachusetts. And that's eventually where I ended up doing high school, which is when I really started considering myself and my identity and ideas about me other than I'm Mexican and I'm in the US to any sort of degree. And I always knew that there was something that was very different about me. But I grew up in a very Protestant family from Mexico City. And I mean, they were very nice. And like, I'm not going to say that they ever outwardly did anything wrong against me, but it was still very much growing up with the idea that being gay is bad. So it would be the biggest nightmare if my son is gay. But of course, he's clearly gay. Like, he's going to. So there was a lot of self-doubt and a lot of difficulties coming to terms with that. Especially because having moved to the US fairly late in childhood, I didn't behave like most Americans expected someone of my age and honestly skin color, which is Mexican, to behave. So I didn't look like the stereotypical. I didn't look like the stereotypical Mexican. I didn't behave like the stereotypical American. So there was a lot of ostracization coming about that. And one of the few communities at the time that I was able to build was actually through the church. But there was also a lot of this like, well, if they found out everything about me, then would the support group still stand? So then I went to college, Dartmouth College in New Hampshire, another very rural part of the great northern woods. And as a similar thread with many people on this panel, liberty and distance from everything else gave me an opportunity to finally explore some of these aspects. But there was always like going back into the closet. And at one point I did finally tell my mother, but like it didn't go very well. And I mean, I'm not going to say that it shattered our relationship. It just put this giant wedge that we never talked about for a long time. But it did make things a little bit more difficult. Dartmouth is also when I started exploring more of what I wanted to study. I joined with the idea of wanting to study chemistry, but for various reasons, because of there were a lot of weird, admittedly, there were a lot of weird courses in chemistry, so the professors didn't really take a lot of time to get close to their students in a way that I had expected for such a small college as Dartmouth, whereas a lot of my physics professors were very happy to engage with their students and figure out what they were misunderstanding and support them in such a way that they could comprehensively understand the material. And at the same time, because of this liberal arts curriculum that we had, I was looking for classes to take care of my social studies requirement. And I took a class on anthropology about the Aztec. And I'm like, well, I'm Mexican, like the Aztec, they're from where I'm at. This should be interesting. And it ended up being just this absolutely amazing experience with a wonderful, very supportive professor who showed me how you can take methods and concepts and processes from the natural sciences, from the physical sciences, and apply them to very rigorously study the past in human behavior. And that just completely shattered my mind because, well, yeah. So I guess to bring that all back to my identity, so up to this point and even to this day, it's always been a lot of straddling this kind of middle ground. Like, I'm Mexican, but don't look very much like one. I'm a natural scientist, but I also like hew a lot to humanist ideas and ideas about meaning and value and subjectivity. I'm gay, but even despite all of those difficult experiences growing up, I actually never lost my faith. I understand perfectly why a lot of people do, and it's a natural thing to do, and I don't fault them. But I'm not someone. So then I got my PhD in archaeology, continued mixing the natural sciences and the human sciences. And since then, I've been in a cognitive science unit in Japan, and now an environmental science unit here. But it's just, to wrap things up, it's always been kind of in the middle of two different types of identities that traditionally tend to clash and not knowing how to.
Okay, I know that we're supposed to be doing a panel, but I got both from TL and from Andres, right, this idea of like in betweenness or looking at things from multiple perspectives. And I think that intersectionality actually helps people do better science, right? Because
yeah,
I mean, diversity is good for diversity's sake, but if we're thinking about this from a STEM perspective or any academic pursuits perspective, the idea that we can ask different kinds of questions will get us more information, right? And I think that if you've had to do that sort of reframing and thinking in your life, you're more likely to do it in your academic life too.
Yeah, I agree. It's the thinking outside the box, I think, that's many people that had never had to think about these things might struggle with. So yeah, that's just another reason why diversity is so important in science. Okay, let's start with our first question. So my first question is, I mean, we already talked about this a little, but which obstacles did you face in your career and how did you overcome them? And then generally, what obstacles are faced by students which identify as a lesbian woman, a gay man, or a trans person? Jordan, you already talked about your obstacles a bit. Maybe you want to start?
Yeah, I can. So I ended up similar to a lot of folks, Andres, I heard this with you too, of like growing up being like, I'm different, but I don't can't put my finger on what it is, right? Like I'm not conforming to, and at the time, like I was, identifying as a girl, and I was like, this is so strange. I just can't fit that mold. And so I went off and got my bachelor's, and that was the first. I lived in rural Wisconsin, which Wisconsin's a very conservative area of the United States, and so moving to a small liberal arts school in Minnesota, I was like, oh wow, queer people are here, interesting. Like, and I didn't realize until I graduated with my bachelor's, and I was at and I went off to my PhD at Mayo Clinic, that I was like, oh, I'm trans. Like that's what this whole thing was. I'm non-binary. Like, and so for me, like it was really hard, one, moving to a new place, moving to a new school. And then I came out within like 2 months of starting my program, which, like, starting a PhD program and coming out at the same, I don't recommend it, but it was really good for me, like at the end of the day. And so that I think was really formative. And I think one thing that, and I touched on this a little bit, I struggled with is I had to go from like just freshly coming out to suddenly advocating for myself, because I realized really quickly, I was like, oh, all of our policies are so gendered that technically these policies don't apply to me as a non-binary person. Oh, all of these professors are openly mocking me for using pronouns. Oh, I am now being, like, as a PhD student trying to do research, I kept being asked to teach, like, professors, teach nurses, like how, like I was teaching pediatric nurses about binding, and I'm like, this is not my job, I'm not being paid for this. But I felt, because as a young queer person, I was like, well, no one else is here and doing this, so I have to, which, like, I'll probably touch on this again, and I think maybe other people feel the same, is sometimes when you're the only queer or trans person in a space, you feel the responsibility of everyone else to make it better, right? Because I knew I was not having a good time, but I was like, but I don't want anyone else to not have a good time. Like, I don't want anyone else to feel these same things. So I'm going to work so hard to make sure that everyone knows, like, I'm like, like, I'm going to change these policies. I'm going to make this better. I'm going to fix everything, which you can't. One person cannot fix everything. It's a system, right? And so I think that was really hard for me to wrap my head around, especially as someone who had recently come out for the first time. And then as I mentioned, I ended up leaving with my master's from my PhD program just due to the transphobia. It got really hard. Like I said, I was teaching professors, and I remember teaching them about pronouns, which, like, I think, like, we all took like a basic English or writing language class, and I had a professor, I remember, raise his hand, and he was like, I can barely remember my students' names. How do you expect me to remember their pronouns? And I was just like, what am I doing here? Why what's going on? And that on top of some issues with my mentor, so I ended up leaving. Which, and this isn't to say, like, if you're struggling as a career student, you should just leave, because that's not always the answer. It was the answer for me, and I didn't, and I don't regret it. I really, really am thankful for my time in that PhD program and in STEM, because it helped me figure out what I'm doing now, because I started seeking out, like I said, feminist science, because I was like, there has to be people who are thinking like me, right? There has to be a group that, like, I can't be the only one. And it turns out I wasn't. It turns out that there were theorists who were talking about this. It turns out that there were people who were already getting, like, discussing all these things that I was bringing up, and I felt very alone bringing up. And so when I left, I feminist science was a big thing that I was like, I want to pursue this. And I was also like, I really like trans health, because I realized the gap in science around trans people, and how there was just no one studying it. So I was like, could I do something? And then that ended up leading me to get my master's in gender studies, and now I'm teaching. And I get to teach things like Intro to LGBTQ Studies, which is my favorite class to teach, because it's literally just a class full of young queer people, some of them who just came out, or people, and we do get a couple of straight and, cis folks who are just like, I just want to be a good ally. And I'm like, I love it, be here. And so then I get to teach them about, like, look at all this history, look at we could talk about activism, we get to develop your sense of self. And so, like, even though I'm no longer in STEM, I still get to utilize all of those skills in my research and in, like, researching humans, because at the end of the day, I came to STEM because I wanted to understand the world better, and I had a lot of fun doing that. And the fact that I can still do research in gender studies and find out things about the world and find out things about people, I see it very equivalently. I'm just, not spending my days in a cell culture hood. Instead, I get to go talk to people, and I get to read, and I get to do research in that way. So, like I said, I don't regret my time in STEM, and I miss it a lot. And there's a lot that I wish, yeah, I could come back, and who knows, I might. I will see. My life, and I think that's the other thing too, is I always thought, like, I'm always going to be a scientist. Like, it was a straight shot. And then my plans changed, and it was okay. And it was totally okay. And my plans might change again. And I think that's kind of cool. Who knows where I'm going to end up? And I'm really grateful for being in a position right now where I get to help young queer people with some of the issues we described. Like, I don't have family who understand, or I have a professor on campus who is super transphobic. How do I navigate that? Or I just realized I had a student at the end of class last semester come up to me, and they were like, hey, I think I'm a lesbian. And I was like, nice, cool, congrats. And they were like, do you have do you have stuff? And I was like, yes, I'll send you all the things. I was like, here's my office hours, here's some reading. And I feel really, really grateful to be in that position to help other young people navigate those first few years of wrestling with your identity, because I wish I had that. And so, yeah, so maybe I'll be back in STEM someday. For now, I'm dabbling in the gender studies, but we'll see if where I end up after that.
Yeah, so I think I mean, leaving is of course always an option, and I mean, you don't have to necessarily leave the field, but I mean, if you feel like the place where you are currently is not good for you, then that should always be an option, and you should always
Yes.
keep in mind that starting new is always better than staying somewhere where you don't want to
Yeah,
be.
and whether that's leaving completely, finding a new school. The other option that I had was just switching from immunology to clinical translational sciences, which I would have done a lot more like, work research with trans people and health disparities. But I was already like a PhD candidate, and I was like, I don't want to. I had a first author paper. Like I was so far in my PhD that I was just like, I can't start over because they would have had me like I would have had to go through a lot more again. And I was like, no, I think we're just gonna step away and take a
Yeah.
breath. Yeah.
And yeah, I personally I have to say that I have not experienced that many obstacles and discrimination, but of course that is first of all because I live in a very liberal part of the world, and also I think because I grew up in like a very liberal time, and I think experience might be different for people that came before me. So
Yeah. I
yeah, I
think
think
the
just
oh
sorry,
sorry, I was
I
saying
think
the school had a lot to do with it too, as a research only institution versus a university that has a lot more student populace. I think that also made a difference for me as well.
yeah, I think Jessica, you talked about this before. Do you want to talk about the problems you face, maybe?
Sure. I came out, I guess, relatively young, right? I was in 8th grade. And I have friends who come out later, and I feel like a lot of the time trying to figure out something about yourself makes everything else harder, right? So it doesn't really matter what you're doing when you're trying to figure out something fundamental about yourself, but whatever it is going to get much harder. And so, sorry, grad school and figuring yourself out at the same time is like the worst combination, right? Grad school is already like you're doing two hard things at once, right? And so, yeah, middle school is hard, but for not to be the like it gets better campaign, but like it gets better. Um, and so middle school and high school were really tough. My parents were not accepting. It was very, very difficult. I was lucky that I was not the only, right? So we did have a gay straight alliance. There was a teacher that was out. Like I had a really good friend who had two moms, and so like they were super helpful. Um, and so finding community will make whatever the hard thing is easier. Um, and I do have a lot of privilege in a lot of ways, right? I'm not white, but I'm Asian. I'm one of the good brown ones. I am queer, but I am also cis, right? Like women who are queer often have it a lot easier in the US than men who are queer. Like in a lot of ways, I am the acceptable version of the different thing. And so I'm a little more comfortable being out in professional spaces now. I'm much more secure in my position. And so I can tell someone that I think they're being a jackass. I can push back and say, no, everybody has pronouns. I'm going to buy these stupid pins, even if you think they're stupid. And if somebody at welcome weekend decides they don't want to come to our school because I put a bowl of pronoun pins out, then I don't want them here anyways, right? Like I am secure enough in my position that I can say those things without fear of repercussion. I am also very lucky that my department chair is very much on the same page, right? Like if somebody was like, oh, I don't want to come to the University of Michigan because they have a bowl of pronoun pins, well, we don't want you anyway. Like, please go somewhere else. And so a lot of the professional obstacles, I guess, to answer your question, Silvio, that have been in my path have been things that I sort of have reframed, right? So like I got a job offer in Florida, which is a less liberal part of the US, and I did not take it, right? So like I am choosing to stay in places where I feel like I can be comfortable. Part of that is because I'm in a point professionally where I can do that. But some of it is also choices you have to make for yourself, right? Like you're saying, TL, make sure that you are safe and comfortable first. And find your community support. And if you can be like, don't feel like you have to be the one to be that for other people all the time, right? Like you don't always have to be the person in the room that stands up and says something, right? Take care of yourself first, put your own oxygen mask on first. If you feel safe and comfortable enough to stand up and say something, then you can maybe make it easier for someone else. And the reason I'm sort of dancing around your question, I guess, Silvio, is that I feel like I haven't had a lot of obstacles to overcome since I have had a faculty position. And being a postdoc was long enough ago that like I'm wondering how much it was something I put on myself versus something that was external, right? Like I wasn't necessarily being comfortable being all the way out when I was on the job market the first time, but I don't know, like me now would say, oh, well, if you're not comfortable going somewhere and being out, you don't want that job anyway. Right? Like,
Yeah, I think it's a
I will
valuable.
find it, yeah, like I will find a job and I want it to be one where I feel safe. So maybe I shouldn't hold myself back when I do that. And similarly, like, I mean, I need to get my hair redone, but like for a while I wasn't dyeing my hair while I was on the job market. And then I was like, wait, no, if somebody won't hire me because I am too obviously different, then like I don't want to go work there.
Yeah, I think it's an important point that maybe a lot of the obstacles we think we're facing are in our minds, or not necessarily in our mind, but
right?
yeah,
Yeah,
of
like
course.
I don't want to overstate this, right? Like there are definitely cases where things are still bad, right? Like I'm not going to say it's all
Mhm.
sunshine and puppies. And I think that we need to advocate for ourselves and be like, listen, if you're interviewing for grad school and looking at a bunch of places, if your program is toxic, if right, like whatever the thing is you're doing, don't go to the terrible place. I
Yeah.
think things are better enough that you now have an option to go someplace better. So go someplace better, right? Which doesn't mean that everywhere is better. Yes, this may limit some of your options. No, I'm never going to go work in Texas. So sorry. I recently did a pharmacology in color event where we were inviting back underrepresented minorities from all across the country to come speak and like do this basically for our current trainees. And I had an alumnus who I wanted to invite back, who is currently at a university in Texas. And Texas has instituted a policy where anything that has diversity, equity, and inclusion in it is a no-go. And so he was not able to come to our event because it had DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion in the title. And so he might lose his job in Texas, even though he was coming as a private individual to speak at his alma mater. So, you know, if I ever call him up again, I'm going to be like, hey, you probably need to find a job somewhere else. But, you know, yes, things are still sometimes bad in places, but I think that they are also good in enough places that you need to be willing to advocate for yourself and go somewhere else. But like I said, I also am coming from a position of relative privilege, and so I have had the ability to go someplace that I felt comfortable in being myself, which is not the case for everyone.
Yeah, thank you. Chris, do you have something to contribute? Some
Well,
obstacle you face?
hearing these stories makes me feel very lucky because I really, I mean, I really didn't face too many challenges actually. Maybe I'm just looking back at the world with rose-tinted glasses, but to me it was really a non-issue.
Okay, then
But I do
let's
have a point to
okay.
I would say most of the challenges I've had have been in my professional career. So after I graduated with it now in this job, is actually making changes on an institutional level, arguing to my colleagues why a pronoun badge is important when they say, yeah, but this is the Netherlands. We're just a liberal country, right? So every pronoun is fine. Yes, but my point is that you wearing a pin does this, this, and this. Yeah, but we just let people be what they want to be. Yes, but you know, and even getting funding for a
Does it
diversity.
hurt to put on a pin? Just put on the pin. Does it hurt?
Exactly. And getting funding for our diversity and inclusivity office was also a challenge here even 5 years ago because they were like, yeah, but we're done. We've done inclusion, right? We're finished. Yeah, you've done some of it,
You
but
solved it?
yeah,
Good
but there
job.
are other things to fight for. And there's a lot of intersectionality, as Jess has mentioned a few times, like, you know, that are not discussed. And there's issues with first generation students, and there's issues with, you know, ageism in our population, right? I mean, in academia, I think if you're trying to find a job in you know, 2 or 3 years away from retirement, it can be just as bad as if you're just getting into academia. So, you know, it is interesting to live in a country where, yeah, I'm very lucky that this is not an issue. You know, we've had gay marriage here. I think this was the second country in the world to institute it. And it's really not an issue. Nobody even will have a discussion about it because it's so much water under the bridge. And then you try on an institutional level to have some gender neutral bathrooms in every building, and they're suddenly like, what? Why would you possibly want to do that? And it's like, yeah, guys, you think you stopped with the first rainbow flag in an Amsterdam Pride and everything is solved. So slightly different answer to your question. But it is interesting to see how those issues still exist, but definitely on a different level than we're talking about in some other countries and some parts of other countries as well.
Mhm.
I know you want to move
Yeah.
on quickly, Sylvia, but if I'd like to be
Go
a party
ahead.
pooper briefly if I can. So one place, like, it hasn't faced too much of an obstacle for me because I've chosen to adapt to it, but it is at least something that is still present and very difficult to work on in science. And that's if you're a field researcher, then the types of scientific questions that you're asking are implicitly constrained by your identity. If the species or community or rock outcropping that you want to study is in an area that is not very friendly to who you are, then you have to take the decision of either changing what you're going to study or briefly going back in the closet and pretending that you are someone that you are not. I'm not going to name the specific communities out of respect for them, but there are situations when I'm working on archaeological projects when I go back in the closet. And I mean, it's fairly easy for someone who's straight passing, but if you're going to be living there for 1, 2, 3 months at a time, like over conversation, people are going to start asking you things about your life back home, about your friends, about your romantic interests. So I have also been in situations where I ask friends who are girls of mine, like, hey, could we take some pictures pretending that we're a partner? So I can say that, like, I have an ex, and that way, like, they stop crying about why I don't talk about any former girlfriends about mine. And I don't think anything would happen to me personally if they found out that I was gay because I am a foreign researcher. I come with money, so like you're not. But like it's definitely not a good situation that you want to be in. And again, depending on where you're working, it might actually be an existential question.
Yeah, but that's also a good point. Like you don't have to. You can also strictly separate your personal life and your career in that sense.
Mhm.
Yeah, and so let's move on to our next question. Which kind of goes on to what Chris and what I said as well, that I didn't experience that many obstacles. So how did being queer influence your career, or also maybe just your personality in a positive way?
Well, I think I said a
Does
little
anyone-
bit already. I think we
Mhm.
ask better questions if you're used to reframing things, right? I think you can ask more interesting questions. You can have a more flexible way of thinking about whatever the scientific problem you have is if you've already had to practice that on a very like deeply personal level. And I do think that it also helps build STEM, right? Like I think we do better science when everyone is there, right? Because everyone's going to ask different questions. And so I think we do better work. And if you feel safe to be here, then and so you can approach, like Chris was saying, you can approach institutional problems with the same lens, right? Like, well, if people do better work, how do we make, like, if people are happier, if, okay, so I hate this framing, it's a very American framing, but if people do better work when they're happy, how do we make people happier? Okay, so bathrooms are hard because getting people to change the plumbing in a 50-year-old building is difficult, but we can change the signs, right? That's not hard. They put in always touchless faucets since like touching faucets gives you germs, but they're often calibrated very narrowly to save water, which like I get, we want to save the water and save the planet, but we also need everybody being able to wash their hands regardless of skin tone. So let's recalibrate the sinks, right? Like things that we can think of, like we can think about both the institutional environmental problems and the scientific problems more flexibly, I think, because you've had to be flexible in your own thinking of yourself.
Yeah, so diversity is definitely something that's very important in science, especially because you want to have different opinions, and that's honestly what makes a good project, right? But do you guys have like another story that specifically you have? For instance, I would say being queer can also be like quite the quite the asset at this point, depending, of course, on where you are. I mean, right now I'm organizing this panel for my degree, and I think it's a nice thing to do. And like I said, for me, community is very important. So for me, it's very rewarding to do this, and it's definitely a positive aspect of being queer that you can always connect with a community like this.
I
Okay.
think one good aspect of it, it's related to what Jessica is saying, but not entirely, is that at least having a number of queer people in science, it's not only good for science, but it's good for questioning the internal structures that make science what it is. Like one thing that a lot of us have been touching on is how the physical sciences often claim to be fully objective, and I mean there are certain systems in which I might quibble in, but overall, like at least the way that we interpret these implications is it, it's fully structured around the powers that already be. So having people who are just used to saying, well, no, this is wrong and this is oppressing me and this is uh, being interpreted in a way that helps push society forward, I think is useful beyond just helping people that look like us or people that might be marginalized. I think it's an entire system effect in which everyone benefits.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think for me it gave me a lot of awareness of the challenges other groups have. Like, despite the fact I've had a relatively trouble-free existence, I'm not ignorant to that. That's not the usual, and also like made me realize where there are other marginalized groups, like to be an advocate for them, right? To say, actually, hey, we're sort of allies. We're fighting the same fight here. I'm in the feminist movement in our university, and people often say to me, "But why are you in the feminist movement? You're not a woman." And I'm like, "Yeah, but if only half of us are trying to make a difference, and the other half are like, no, everything's fine, then you're never going to get any progress." It's across the board, and it's also disabled access. It's also in the Netherlands we have a huge discussion about internationalization of universities, but when you look at it, it's not very diverse. Everybody is basically the same kind of shade of color, and what you're saying is we've just got a lot of people from Europe and North America in our university. So where's the rest of the crowd? Why are we not actually truly diverse, and why are we not unlocking the full spectrum of the world if that's what we want to do as a university? And so I think for me, it's also like given me that empathy to think along with what are the challenges that other people are having, and sort of embrace that is difficult. I think almost every person has their own individual challenge somewhere along the line, and also when I'm helping students, it feels like I kind of have that kind of, I can imagine how that is for you, and that empathy to go, okay, yeah, I'm not at all identifying with that situation, but I can translate it into something I can relate to, and then having that genuine conversation of like, yeah, I really feel you, and let's get through this together, rather than, oh yeah, that's tough for you, yeah, good luck getting wheelchair access to the lab or whatever the problem that they have is.
Yeah, like certainly intersectionality is like a big issue as well, and that also I think is more aware in people that are queer, because people often know what it means being ostracized. So that's definitely something that's also strengthens your character, I think. And then probably my final question, looking at the time, is something very practical. As myself, I'm personally going to apply for a PhD soon. And I mean, this definitely also applies to people applying for undergraduate programs or master's degrees. But my question is, how do you find, or what do I look for finding an inclusive and accepting either like lab, like a supervisor, or even just a degree program? What do I look for? And then also, as a final thing, what is your message to the aspiring queer students that are listening right now?
One thing that I would suggest, and I wasn't looking for when I was looking for PhD programs, is like when you go interview, if you are able to ask about the queer community, like ask other students like about other, like, and meet with queer students, like and that's PhD programs, like try to do that as master programs, bachelor programs, because I feel like that would have like given me like, oh, this is what I'm going to encounter, but at the time I didn't know that that's what I was looking for. So like talk to the students there, because even if like you're like, oh well, this university has a GSA and it has this and it has this, that might not be like actually representative of what it's like to be a student there. So like talk to other students. And I think that's my other, like, find your community. Whether you are at a university that is super like hostile or a university that's not, like, go find other queer people or other people who are in some of those similar situations, right? Who are also marginalized. And I think, you know, I think part of, at least for me, like a big part of STEM is like working with other people to discover the world around you. And so that you know, I sought that out. I find it to be super helpful. And if, and you know, and or find that one professor or that one person, maybe if you're not ready to be out in a community, like, can you find someone who is just like kind and nice to you while you're figuring yourself out? That can go a long way too. Obviously pick your school for the science, you know, make sure it has the programs you want, like all of that good stuff, but like that stuff matters too. Like you want to find those allies. And I think my message is like I said, even though I had like my struggles, like I don't regret being out and queer in STEM. It really helped me. It made me the person I am today. And it actually, I think, you know, as Chris mentioned, it made me way more empathetic to the world around me and the situations around me. So like even if you're not ready to come out now, like we will be ready for you when you are. Like so many people will be ready when you are ready.
And if I can just piggyback on that, because I'm also in the US, right? So um, kind of the two things that I would try to do when you're looking at schools is 100% talk to the students, right? So in the US, when you're applying to graduate programs, there is an interview weekend where hopefully now after COVID, they fly you out. And at this point, like you're trying to suss out whether or not this is a good plan or not. If they don't let you meet with the students, that's a red flag. Do not go there. When you are meeting with the current trainees, be aware that they're trying to make their schools sound amazing, but they should still be honest. And so see what they say. Ask them all of your questions. So that is the 100% talk to the current trainees. The other thing to think about is to look at what is available, because you know we live in the internet age. Look at what resources are available at the institution. So do they have, University of Michigan has a Spectrum Center. Do they have institutional resources where there are dollars on the line, where they are investing in something? So we have a DEI 2.0 initiative where there's actual money to do the institutional changes. We have a Spectrum Center that has an actual building with actual money, right? So is the institution committing resources, and are the trainees happy, are the two things I would say. The third thing that I would say, which is harder to do beforehand, but if you're going for a PhD program, do somewhere that does rotations, because anybody can look nice on paper. You have to actually try it out. Usually rotations are somewhere between 4 and 13 weeks. I would say a 4-week rotation, anybody can play nice for 4 weeks. Try to do one of the longer rotations. But then you're embedded in the lab, you're taking your classes with your cohort of students, but you're in the lab and you get to try it out. I wouldn't do anything without a test drive. So if you're looking at schools and the school doesn't have a rotation program for PhDs, I would not suggest going there, because you're going direct to a lab and what if it's terrible? So I would say go somewhere that lets you try things out.
Well, that can be somewhat difficult, especially for in Europe, because we mostly don't really do rotations. We mostly just
and so
apply for
as I was saying, like
professor.
if I can only talk about the US system, right?
Yeah.
But most STEM programs in the US have a rotation system. There are very, very few that don't. Direct admit is much less common in the US. I am less familiar with the European systems.
Chris, can you give us some insight on that?
No, I'm writing it down as an idea to adopt here, right? Because like my research is connected to a national lab, right? So we have like eight or 10 departments in Amsterdam where you could totally do rotations, right? You could say, okay, you got 4 weeks, 5 weeks, 6 weeks, whatever here, and you get to meet the current students, get to meet the staff, and then everybody can kind of settle down where they want to be. But no, we just do it like we treat it like a job interview, and we just we recruit you and drop you in, and if it doesn't work, it doesn't work.
I bet you that there is data about successful matriculation for rotations and no rotations, because it can be for any reason, right? It could be personal reasons where you don't get along with the mentor, or it could be that you just genuinely hate the science and you didn't know until you tried. So I actually came into grad school thinking I wanted to work on antibiotics, and I'm over here in like basically neuroscience.
Same thing with me. I started with viruses and ended up in protein misfolding. So
one thing that I guess I could add to this is that if this is not an option to where you land, or if you end up, or if your discipline isn't very prone to having rotations, you should definitely make sure that whatever school you wind up is in somewhere where the school isn't your only support system that you have to rely on. Because if everything goes wrong while you're a PhD student, depending on what academic system and what discipline you're in, your PI will likely have a disproportionate amount of control and power over you. And if this is a toxic situation, you don't want to be in a place where they can pretty much destroy your life. Yeah, be very, very cognizant of like, okay, I'm willing to risk maybe going to this university, but because it's in a fairly liberal or welcoming city where I feel that I might be able to build friends and support structures outside of the university while I push my way through it. Because I mean, I think sometimes we tend to idealize the work that we've done as scientists, but it's very, very difficult. And you will hit some of the lowest psychological lows you can while you're trying to get your PhD. And being marginalized for something that you have very little control over is not something that you want to have on top of that.
And that's actually another thing. So one, you should have support structures outside of the university, if at all possible, but also look at what the university offers. So do they have an office of conflict resolution? Is there an ombudsperson? Is it set up in such a way that your PI is the only one who gets to decide whether or not you graduate, or do you have a co-chair or a co-mentor or another person who can advocate for you that you get to choose? So look at how distributed the power is. Versus how linear the reporting structure is. Because hopefully you don't end up in a terrible situation where one person controls your fate and they're an awful human being. But if the university is set up in such a way that that power is distributed, they're probably, one, is going to be more likely for there to be someone else for you to talk to. And two, the university has like an overall outlook that is aware that bias can exist, right? And so you might be able to make a case.
Yeah, I was gonna throw that same piece of advice in, Jess. I think again, I was completely naive going into my PhD about the power structures of universities, and thankfully I got a good one. I got a good supervisor who was great. But it's you know, I've heard some real horror stories since then about the ways in which some research groups effectively just use students as slave labor, basically saying, no, you're not going to graduate until you do 6 more months of data or publish another paper or whatever they wanted. And you know, you look at these situations and it turns out, yeah, the student was completely helpless because that one signature doesn't appear on your thesis. It doesn't get filed in the library. You're not getting anything. And I think yeah, understanding the system and the program you're going into is super critical, especially when you're in a of a background where there can be some other personal feelings or situations that can also cloud the science.
And sorry, I keep interrupting. I can only speak to the US, but most programs in the US have something called a student handbook, where a lot of this is outlined. And oftentimes that is available on the department website. So I don't know if this is true in other countries, but in the US, you can usually get the student handbook. Or the graduate school that you're applying to will have some sort of like expectations type thing that will outline a lot of this. So I know that that's a lot of work to like go to each individual school that you're looking at and find this document, but that should exist and be available to you as you're looking at this.
Yeah, here actually PhD students are already employees. They pay tax, they have health insurance. They are somewhat protected as employees are here. But of course there is a procedure for attaining your PhD that goes alongside of that. They have to qualify right in the end. But yeah, very similar.
Yeah, so a lot of great information. Basically, ask questions as much as you can. Ask everyone, students, read all the documents on the website, and don't commit to something for a long time that you're not sure about. Great, so it's 6:30. We'll now take questions from the audience. Either use the hands up function in Zoom if you want to ask a question yourself, or just post it in the chat if you would like me to ask a question. Yes, someone asked a question. I came out this year as non-binary while being on a study abroad in the Netherlands. Definitely agree distance is great for self-discovery. But sometimes I feel guilty and scared about not fitting into these boxes, into the box those around me want to. How can I become more self-accepting?
As a non-binary person, I can throw a little bit in. It can be really hard when you are outside of what the status quo is, or what, especially gender norms are so pervasive. It can be really difficult to be like, yeah, I don't fit in that. For me, it took some of it was time. Like it just like, you just came out this year. That's relatively like that's still very early. Like, to work through that. So know that it like it just takes some time to develop. But also, I found too that for me, fitting into the gender norms was way more difficult and hurtful than being outside of it. And that sometimes you don't have to go and obviously like being non-binary, you don't have to look a certain way, you don't have to dress a certain way, but sometimes doing it like ramping it up slowly, like you don't have to go from 0 to 100. Like you can, what am I comfortable with right now? Like, is it wearing nail polish? Is it trying a skirt on? Is it, doing makeup when I usually didn't do that before? Like touching, like dabble. Like you don't have to jump all the way into the non-binary pool and be the big non-binary person. And I think I get a lot of students who just come out who are like, I want to be known as the non-binary. I want to be everything. You don't have to be, actually. Like you can just be you with a little sprinkle on the top, or you can just be you and you don't even have to change a single thing. But I also really recommend like listen, like see if you can find some podcasts or videos of other non-binary people talking about themselves and their identity, how they like that helped me a lot is reading theory, which is, me and my gender studies brain, but like reading other people's experiences, I was like, oh, okay, I get it. And also I just want to affirm you and say like you are totally valid the way that you are. You do not have to fit into those gender norms. Those are social constructs. You can do you, and it's totally okay to do that as at the pace that you want. So that's what I have.
And sort of along those lines, so you can try little things, right? So I had a friend who was trying on different pronouns and trying on different names. And so we went and got a cup of coffee and they gave their new name. And that was what the barista called. And the barista didn't know anything, right? Like the barista has no idea what this person's name is. It's whatever you give them. So they got to try out somebody calling them by a name that they thought they might like. And then we sat down and it was just the two of us surrounded by strangers. And I used their they them pronouns the whole time. And they tried on their new name. And then they were like, actually, I don't like this one. I want to try a different one. So we got another cup of coffee on another day and like just try the thing out in like a small way and see if it feels good or not. And it helps if you have like a person or two that you are willing to go on this journey with. Um, I don't know pretty much anything about the Netherlands, but I hope that you have somebody that is on this journey with you to be a helper. Um, and just try it out. I mean, you can if you want to go in for a big splash, right? Like do everything, but you don't have to all at once. And like TL said, you don't have to change anything at all if you don't want to, right? Like outwardly, you can look however you look, and you can be inwardly whoever you are, and that is choose your own adventure from whatever way you want to assemble these things.
Yeah, by the way, if anyone from the audience wants to contribute to one of the questions, you're also free to do so. Do you have any more questions? Otherwise, I will ask one. Yeah. As a student, how can you find out who are queer allies? And when you are, sorry, as a student, how can you find out who are queer allies when you are not ready to come out?
There are a lot of ways that I feel like you could do this. So I don't know where you are, Rain, but I'm guessing that there's some way that you could maybe flag that you yourself are an ally and see if anyone says anything, right? And like see if maybe you can find somebody who's like kind of also suggesting that they would be a safe person. I I mean, yes, I'm here today, right? I've got the rainbow earrings on, but I'm not wearing the rainbows and the pronoun pins and whatever for me so that people know who's in my bed. I am wearing them so that people know that I am a safe person to come to. And so a lot of the times you can just kind of keep your eyes open for that sort of thing. Or you can wear those things and say, no, I'm not, I'm just saying that I am also an ally, and then see who comes and talks to you. It's like the awkwardest dating game, but you can find little ways to flag that you're interested in it.
Yeah, I find myself sometimes doing similar things, like almost very external, like, oh, I read this thing about something distant over here, and then see what the reaction is, and then the next time it'll be, oh yeah, I drop in, something a little bit closer to home until I don't get any negative reactions, and then at some moment you begin to realize who in your community is an ally or maybe isn't. I've actually had also some very interesting experiences with colleagues because I have a colleague who's an out gay man, and he found it very difficult to understand what his role was in a classroom where he might have people's pronouns on the attendance sheet. He suddenly got very uptight about, well, what happens if I use the wrong one and I'm going to get sued for this, and so it's better to just not know, and then I'll just call everybody by what I want and that'll be fine. It's like, no, you're supposed to be on our team here. And you're just unpicking tens of years of hard work by just refusing to look at your attendance list and do your best. That's all we're asking, right? Is just do your best, be empathetic, and understand the situation that people are in. But sometimes colleagues panic that suddenly, oh, everything goes suddenly very woke and I have to change everything, and oh, panic, let's not do anything because of that.
Yeah, if I can piggyback a little bit off that one, I think sometimes it's you have to take certain actions to help allies also find you. And if I don't want to put the responsibility on you, but at least in certain situations when I have come out to someone before they had a chance to interact with me a lot, I knew I sensed a little bit of apprehension and a little bit of fear. It's like, okay, now I'm afraid that I'm going to say that, like, if I say something wrong, I'm going to like go out all out on you. So, I mean, it's difficult to do if you are someone who hasn't received much empathy. But I think one of the easiest ways of attracting other allies and other people who are going to show empathy to you is by demonstrating that you also show empathy to others. I mean, like begets like, and what better way of finding allies than by treating people the way that you want to be treated? Because someone might say something that if they knew what your opinion, what your identity was, they might think, oh shit, did I insult them? Like maybe understand that they're saying it out of ignorance. They're not saying it out of maliciousness. So if you can demonstrate that you're someone who's approachable, who's empathetic, who can understand people's fears about interacting with someone that they don't know much about a community that they don't know much about, then I think you have a very strong chance of attracting very, very good people.
Yeah, I think
Also,
it's
oh, sorry, go ahead,
sorry.
Silvio.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, I mean, it's also probably something for the panelists that I think Chris said this as well before, that, just wearing small things like an armband or something, or I've had professors had like an email header of like being a queer ally or something like that, can be very helpful, and just communicate to students that you would be an ally.
Yeah,
And you can
also,
always
like,
feel it.
oh, sorry. Just I said, saying this before with the PhD thing, but like listen to other students, because even if you don't ask about it, you will likely hear like who's the asshole, who's, like, and it just those little things where even if it's not directly like this person's safe or this person's unsafe for trans or queer people, you'll get a sense by just hearing. Also, like if there are diversity related events on your campus, go to those and you can see what professors are showing up to them, who's prioritizing, because it can be really easy to put a rainbow flag up, which like I don't want to like say that's like not an important thing and that doesn't signal allyship, but going that step further of like faculty taking the extra step to go to an event that maybe they're not required to go to, that can show an extra level of like, I'm learning about this, I'm here for this, and I want to be a part of that type of space. So that can be helpful too.
And it doesn't just have to be like a particular event, right? Like, so there's like a student orientation week at a lot of universities, and a lot of identity groups will often table and have like a little setup with stuff. So you can always go to those too, and see who's around and see what resources there are. And presumably the person on the other side of the table is supportive, right? If they're sitting at a table giving out information.
Another thing I do as an educator, which is sort of my low-key sign, is with my literature list, I also acknowledge that it's you know, it's full of mostly men, mostly what do we call old, mostly white Europeans. And I say, look, this is the problem, that physics was discovered and the books were written by these folks. Sorry for that. That's just how it is. I will always do my best to give you the best resources I can. And if you have more diverse ones, then let me know. And that for me is like a really good way of just showing like I'm open-minded to these things. You can come talk to me about the literature issue, or you can come talk to me about other issues. And I think like allyship is very multifaceted, and the people who are thinking about these things will think about it in many different places in their education or in their research or in their service work, as TL mentioned. Like you see the same faces pop up at these events, and you're like, oh, interesting, okay, you don't really apply to this group, but it's cool to see you here again. Maybe bring some colleagues next time.
And also, like, don't take our word as gospel, right? We are professionals, but not in this. So therapy also is a good place to look for self-acceptance.
Yeah. We have no more questions in the chat. If you want to ask a question, just go ahead. We still have 15 more minutes. But I have a question kind of on what Chris just said. Since I like that we are like a very diverse panel, we're from a lot of countries and also working in a lot of fields. And what I kind of want to get at is, how do you think your experiences differ in your different fields and also in the different countries you've been? For instance, I think, Chris, you're the only physicist here. I think the rest of us are more like biology based. And I guess you hear a lot about physics being very male dominated, yeah, type of fields. Did you think people have more to struggle in these kinds of fields than others?
Yeah, I don't really know. I don't really know what it's like in other fields. I guess that's the problem. I know
Okay,
what's
yeah.
like in my little silo, but beyond that, I don't really know. I think you know, there's definitely like Tia was mentioned, like when you're working in like critical areas such as healthcare, like yeah, okay, you can kind of ignore that there's gender issues there, but if you do, you're just not doing a very good job of your research, right? And you know, the particles I measure at the LHC, they don't care whether they're measured by a queer scientist or not, or the result doesn't change if they're measured by a queer scientist. I hope not, anyway. So
You won the Nobel Prize.
But what you then get is this kind of like in the harder sciences, you get this kind of like, yeah, but you know, this is all, we're just dealing with fact. So like it all becomes very rigid very quickly, and then it's like, yeah, we just do logic, and all of this rest of your personal life is all out there. But I think like, especially at like bigger organizations, like, I mean, CERN has a huge LGBT community now, which I think 10 years ago you would not have had at all. And it is still very male dominated. It is still, you know, there's a lot of female PhD students, almost 50%, but most of them don't continue because of the academic problem, you know, which is a bigger, more systematic thing of, you know, wanting to start a family, not willing to do 5 postdocs in 3 different countries in 5 years, trying to find a partner who, you know, is in the same country as you, and things like this. These are all systematic issues that push women out of science as well. But you know, I think like what Jess mentioned about the doing better science, like big organizations in physics and engineering are now beginning to realize, like, oh shit, if we just keep on hiring without diversity, we're not competing with the rest of the world who might, right? Yeah, so it is interesting, but yeah, I wonder if maybe there's for sure a bigger influence, less on discipline, but more about like where in the world you're working, right? Because, you know,
Yeah.
just was even alluding to like, you know, challenges of getting jobs in the next state over. Okay, it's not quite that extreme, but you know, it's pretty shocking to hear that that's actually something that you would seriously restrict you from applying to those jobs, right?
Yeah, I'm thinking about going back into a PhD program, and something that's really difficult for me is like half the states in the United States are not have they have anti-trans laws. Like I'm not going to go to school at a place where I can't even safely go to the bathroom. And so that already like takes, you know, all the programs I could apply and goes like this. And that can be really tough. Field wise though, I've been in there's a lot of queer and STEM like broad organizations. And through some of my work and meeting people in those, you're gonna find queer people in a lot of fields. I mean, they are everywhere. And there is definitely like, I think, you know, like you mentioned, like physics, I think we think of like how very male dominated, but academia has like across the field used to be like that. And it is shifting. And I think that is important. I do find biology or biology basis tends to have a little bit more diversity. And I do think part of that is accessibility of academics. Like I became a biologist because I was not as good as math and physics as I thought, and so I didn't
Me
have
too.
teachers. Yeah, I didn't have professors who like treated me in a way that made me feel like I could do it, which was very much a patriarchy, you know, gender based thing. So that's a part of it too. So it can be more difficult depending on like down the line how the path there too. But it is you can find your people, and they are there even if they're not very visible. They do exist, and I always try to keep that in mind.
One, having worked in across a number of disciplines, like from physics, psychology, and cognitive science, and anthropology, like one additional thing I'd like to add is that the social sciences are kind of very, very different beast now than the natural sciences and the physical sciences that we've been discussing. In my PhD program, at least my first 2 years, I think there was only one straight white male. So it's very unlike a lot of the types of programs that have been discussed. But with that now, because at least in anthropology, that was my PhD program, part of what we're tasked is with studying the nuances of cultural diversity and human behavior across its wide swath in space and time. So sometimes there were situations when people's opinion on social theory or people's opinion on how to interpret data would clash with the identity that someone in the room had to build around themselves. And I won't lie, it was sometimes very ugly. And administrators would have to step in, and they would have no idea how to deal with that situation. See why both sides were harmed, but that is something to keep in mind. That if you are very passionate about your identity and you want to apply STEM or some academic discipline to it, that also opens you up to potential exposure into being attacked, not just as an academic, but personally. So I guess that would probably be the biggest difference between social sciences. At least in my experience with some of the physical sciences and the environmental sciences, there I feel it is much more subject to whatever happens to be in vogue in that country at that time and place. So I endorse everything else that's been said.
Yeah, I think also a lot of what many straight people don't understand is that being gay, you can travel to like a lot of countries because you might be in danger yourself, and that's, I guess, what many people don't think of. And yeah, Andres, you've been to like 3 different continents at this point.
I've held positions in 3 different continents, but I've done research in 4.
Can you tell me a bit about how your experiences there differed? I mean, I guess you're more
I
straight
mean,
passing a lot, so
I kind of alluded to it that when I go to the places where I
yeah.
suspect if like I'm very straight passing, and I'm not someone who like I would consider myself an ally, but I'm not someone who is going to fly the flag visibly every opportunity I can. That I'm just a very, very discreet person and I like to give much information about my own life. But even then, like I've been to places where like they tell stories of like, oh well, such and such's kid is insert whatever language is the slur, whatever slur is the local one for or gay. He should just take a shotgun. And again, I know that given the power dynamic that's going on, like I am researcher coming into money, nothing's probably going to happen. But I don't want to risk it. At least in professional settings, there I've actually felt more comfortable in a lot of the places that don't have as advanced protections and as advanced uh, yeah, that aren't as fine-tuned to some of the problems that we face. And I think there it's more a formula of me not being visibly gay. So like this is not on a lot of people's minds. So if they do eventually find out, it's like, oh, it's just another average thing. But like in the United States, this happened a lot. Whenever someone would find out about, now they add all of these other assumptions on me. And if I don't behave exactly what all their assumptions are, then like I'm wrong, I am self-hating, and I need to do something to change that. And quite frankly, I thought that what we had all been fighting for hundreds of years is the ability to break free from labels, to truly be who we are, and as long as we're not hurting others, to celebrate the beauty of life, however we choose to do so.
Okay, we have one more question from the chat. I think especially when one still has trouble accepting themselves, it can sometimes lead to personal need to overachieve in a way that can sometimes be unhealthy. Since it can still, however, take a lot of effort to make it in academia, I would ask, how do you balance being good at what you do with not being too hard on yourself?
Therapy.
I
Yeah,
don't know if I balanced that.
seconded. Also, you do not have to be a queer academic. You can be queer and you can be an academic too, right? And that's not me saying like don't be out as an academic, but like you can have some separation in those things. And similarly, like you should have like more than just academia in your life. Like find other places to, you know, to achieve. Like go be a really great gardener as you're also like being a great scientist. Like you don't have to pour it all into academia specifically, which I find like I struggled with, where I would want to like do and be the best scientist, but I was like, okay, or I could be the best artist and then do my science, right? Like you can find some other places to put some of that energy and wanting to like develop yourself. And it doesn't have to be the place that you're also working and putting 80 hours a week into. Like find other places to put maybe some of that energy of like, I want to do things, I want to develop things. It doesn't have to be STEM. It can be, it doesn't have to be.
And kind of piggybacking on that, like, this is the really uncomfortable question, right? But like, what does success look like to you, right? So if you want to be the tippity top of your field, more power to you. I have chosen not to be. Like, I do think I could compete at that level, but I kind of like going home and like playing with my dog. So no, I mean, I personally think I'm doing well, but I'm not like running Pfizer or something, right? Like I have decided that I would rather go home and hang out with my friends and play with my dog and putter in the garden. And so like it is hard when you feel like you have to be the best to even get in the door, but you should question whether or not that is the door you want to go through, right? Like what does success look like to you? What does happy look like to you? Part of why I do so much DEI work is so that we can all be as good as the mediocreest straight white man, right? Like, and still be here. You shouldn't have to overachieve to feel like you belong in the place, and you need to figure out what you want your life to look like for you, which is kind of sideways to your question, but I think that sort of gets at the underlying assumption is you need to figure out what is comfortable for you and what you want for your life. And if you want to like overachieve and be amazing, then like, yes, I support you. Do that thing. But you don't have to. You can, you know, do something else too.
You don't have to sacrifice yourself. You.
Yeah, watch out for your mental health, because I've seen too many people had burnouts and yeah, physically hurt themselves from wanting too much out of their degree.
It's just a degree. Your life is more.
Yeah. Okay, well, it's 7 already, so this is the end of our discussion today. Thank you so much to everyone in the audience for joining, and thanks a lot for the panelists today joining us. Tia Jordan, Andreas Mejia, Chris Pauly, and Jess Anans. Thank you so much for coming. I think you made some great points, and I hope that people in the audience took some helpful tips from that. yeah, thanks a lot, and have a great weekend.
Everyone.
Thank you.